we go. All right. So hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Sokol, and I'm co-president of the Mid-Atlantic Micro and Nano Alliance. And I'm here with President Heidi Leonard, as well as Professor Sam Emaminejad from UCLA. And we're going to be doing a little bit of a different approach today, where we have a link underneath the video where you can see the original talk, and then we're going to do the Q&A right here live. All right, and so actually, Heidi, do you want to take the first question?
Sure, so it was my question, right? That's what you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay, so I asked if you could explain more about functionalizing the surface chemistry and how you're making that specific to different analytes.
Perfect. Hey, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Ryan and Heidi, and organizing this. It's a pleasure to be here. And to answer your question, Heidi, basically the idea here is we look for what kind of a target molecule we want to measure. Then we look at what kind of sensing mechanisms are available to detect them. And sometimes, like if there is a sensing recognition layer that is available to detect the molecule, for example, enzymes, our job is easier because then we have elements that we can place on the sensor that can with high specificity kind of target and measure the analyte of interest. But sometimes we may not have the luxury of having a readily available recognition layer. Then we need to be creative. For example, if our target analyte is electroactive, then maybe we can use kind of electrochemical scanning methods that we can sweep for voltage and look at the current responses and see if we can kind of isolate the electrochemical signature response of the analyte. And that's how we usually go for it. And this topic of sensor design, not just, you need to think about it from both ways too, that not only we want to make surfaces sensitive to the target, but also we want to make sure that it's not sensitive to other things that are going on in the sample. And we usually need to also, besides making a surface that has that recognition capability, we need to make sure that it mitigates the effect of the interference from the non-target species that are often at significantly higher concentration levels. So that's like the two angles at the very core, we need to look at it when we are planning our sensors.
Got it. Thank you.
Awesome. I had more of like a philosophical question. I was talking about this with some of my students, but I would say in the research community in general, there's especially for engineering, there's a bit of a range in terms of how different labs position themselves in terms of research. So some lean more towards basic science, some lean more towards like direct applications. Do you find that with your research, it seems a bit more on the application focused side? Does that mean that, I guess when you identify projects, is it typically because there's a particular application that's driving it? Or is there often some fundamental science that just happens to coincide with a particular application?
That's a very good question, because this is something that also our lab members we have this soul searching as well. The way I think about the work that is going on in our lab is at the end, we want to solve the problems of technology development for personalized medicine. Right away, that means that we need to be application driven. But that doesn't mean that we should just look for components and integrate them. We need to also identify what are the bottlenecks that prevent us to create complete systems to address the needs of personalized medicine. And then do innovation at the component level, but then put it in the context of a system that we can then apply in the translational setting. The main goal, I think what drives me here is to create technology that can allow us to generate data. Because if you think about it, our body is a very complex system. If we really want to understand what's going on in our body, especially when we think about in a larger scale, like across the population, we need to gather lots of data. So I think if there's a breakthrough in let's say you make a very good sensor, sometimes I feel like the onus is on us to make sure that we put it in form a complete sensing system and make it deployable at large scale. So then the other part is sometimes we start by thinking that we need to address a certain problem that hasn't been addressed, and we are not quite successful to address that. But then we go back to the drawing board and say, okay, this innovation that we wanted to realize didn't quite materialize the way we wanted to, but what else can we do with it? We were able to create, for example, this new degree of freedom in performing a certain operation. What else can we do with it? What else would benefit from this new degree of freedom that we create? So sometimes I tell my students to think about that with some of the innovations we make, it creates degrees of freedom. And then we need to look back and see, in the past, what were the things that prevent us to be creative? What were the constraints? Now, if we release these constraints, what possibilities open up? And then we position our technology toward those new possibilities. So it's like both directions work for us, coming from a basic science as well as the application. But it really depends on our results when we are pursuing an innovation.
Heidi, do you want to ask the question?
Sure, I'll try, because there's a word I'm not sure I'm going to say correctly. So Mac asked, Iontophoresis is sometimes considered a bad word and has bad connotations after the glucowatch fiasco. To induce sweat production, are there any other ways to do so?
This is a great question, and this is something that it's one of those things that I realize that people in marketing and advertisement deal with it all the time because of this is actually a little bit of I cannot say 100% misconception, but there's a misconception associated with the name. So there was a glucowatch like a couple of decades ago that actually at the time was very innovative, but maybe it was a little bit ahead of itself, didn't quite solve the problems that it needed to. But long story short, they use an electric field to attract ionic species onto the skin. And the idea there was these ionic species create an electroosmotic flow that brings like glucose molecules also onto the surface of the skin, then they can measure it. But as you can imagine, like applying an electric field without any clever innovation is tough, because you're gonna force a very high level of electrical current to be able to bring those very minute amount of glucose onto the surface so that you can measure. So inevitably that results into like burning the skin, right? So, but this process that I just described is called reverse iontophoresis. It's not iontophoresis, but if you think about glucowatch, reverse iontophoresis, and you hear the word iontophoresis, right away, you may get triggered. So I just want to make sure that there's some level of physics is the same, but it's different from reverse iontophoresis. But here's the thing. The other part is we noted in one of the slides you saw, I mentioned that when we were doing iontophoresis, it actually happened to me that this was during my postdoc. I went to Stanford School of Medicine, talked to Dr. Carlos Mila. He introduced me to his setup for inducing sweat. It was a figure you saw in the slide that there was a bulky iontophoresis instrument. And being an electrical engineer, we always like to miniaturize things, right? That's what we do. And then I thought, okay, so all we have to do is this circuit is a few decades old. What we need to do is just miniaturize the circuits and replace the electrode. But long story short, I ended up burning myself because the current we induced was at higher level. Current density was higher as we were making the electrodes smaller. So we had to really think about how can we redesign the electrodes. You notice that typically our electrodes have the ring shape or, have like a ring shape or crescent shape that allow us to focus the electric field in regions that we can deliver sweat-stimulating agonist molecules without having to increase the current. So we have to be innovative in a design of electrodes so that we don't have to pump in a lot of current through our skin. So we have to lower the current density to be able to prevent the burning effect. Also, you notice that in one of the slides I showed that we play around with the agonist compositions so that some agonists are better at stimulating sweat glands, so you don't need to deliver a lot of them, so you can get away with a very small amount of electrical current. But iontophoresis is one of those things that I think has a potential. I know that we apply electrical current could in long term may cause irritation, but these are the challenges that are associated with any technology that we can get clever with solving it. I don't see there's a big difference. Like, it's not like we need to overcome 4 orders of magnitude of difference in current level to be able to make it happen. I understand there's a level of that can cause irritation. So now how can we get clever about our design to address that? And in our capacity, in the short amount of time we solved it by like optimizing the electrode design and the hydrogen containing the agonist. So, but one of the questions I'm particularly interested in, what's the long-term effect of iontophoresis, right? That's another thing that I don't know the answer. I don't think anyone knows the answer. The only data point, really reliable data point we have is iontophoresis is performed on babies across the world to test for cystic fibrosis. And we may not have longitudinal data, but we have a large size of the data to say that it's safe overall, and it's being tested on babies. But I'm sure that now that sweat sensing could be a plausible direction for biomarker monitoring, I think somebody needs to take the lead, perhaps from a clinical side, to look at really what's the long-term effects. And if we apply iontophoresis with this frequency, with this current level over next year on a daily basis, what would happen to the hand of the subject, right? That's also the other thing that maybe I'm expanding a little bit more, but sometimes it depends on the application too. Do we want to push a needle in our hand and be invasive, or do you want to apply a small level of electrical current, but like once a week? It all depends on the end application as well. So I wouldn't write up anything. I just think that we need to think about positioning the technology for the right application. So hopefully that answered the question.
Awesome. Any, I don't know about your plans, but any plans to potentially, spin out some of these technologies as actual companies in the near future?
I think this technology is very much amenable for commercialization, but there's one bottleneck that's one thing I'm committed to do is what's the right application for it? And at what point we can say that what we read in sweat can translate into an actionable feedback in a way that can help us to live happier or healthier, or if you're a pure business person, to make money off of it, right? So this question is a little bit, part of it is close-ended engineering effort. Part of it is a clinical investigation. The part that is about engineering, it takes a few years really, like as long as we have resources, the kind of work that we do in our group or other groups doing a very great work, we don't actually have that much funding and we have these very nice achievements. I'm sure that if there is a funding available for a large-scale commercialization, we can very easily accelerate the developments of these sensors and systems. But one part that we cannot promise, and we need to get to the bottom of it, is what biology tells us. So that requires clinical investigation. It's not like we can put 10 more engineers in the room and get to the answer. At some level, it comes down to just getting testing on many subjects and getting data and look at what this data mean. And if we have an intervention, can we mitigate that issue, or can we improve in performance or not? Because these are some key data sets you need to generate to be able to really claim that you have a technology worthy of investment. And that part, because it's mostly biology related, may take a few years. But still, I think it's a good academic work, because once you start thinking about human subject testing and you're not in an academic environment, things get very expensive very fast. So maybe still is the room for us engineers to work with doctors closely for a few years, at least mitigate the risk of adoption for a particular application before going full on spinning off and making a company out of it.
Cool. Looks like we have another question. You want to actually, I think in terms of timing, that flew by a little bit. So maybe this will be our last one. Heidi, do you want to give it an ask?
Sure. So Mac again asks, how does sweat glucose compare with blood glucose? And is there any lag time between the two measurements?
So this one is a little bit of like little bit abstract to talk about this because for sweat, the way we induce sweat itself takes 5 minutes to 10 minutes for enough sweat to get generated. But typically, if you want to think about lag time, the lag time is on order of 5 to 8 minutes, something that is being reported in the context of interstitial fluid as well. So the lag time is not more than like 30 minutes. The correlation is a tricky question because in some subjects, we see that there's a very good correlation, in some subjects not. But here's the thing, because it really depends on what time you try to pick up the sweat information and correlate it. Because for sweat, that we get a window of like 20 minutes of active secretion, and then sweat secretion rate also changes through this period. And this is the part that, before making a very conclusive remark, I'm interested to get to the bottom of it. Like, how can we mitigate the effect of confounding factors such as secretion rate variability to be able to build a correlation between blood glucose reading and sweat glucose reading? And that's something that needs to be investigated. But overall, my general sense is there is correlation, of course, because we, like in a very simple experiments that we have subjects eat food, like their blood glucose level goes up, sweat glucose level goes up. That itself, this information itself is very useful to keep track of how many times a day your glucose levels get elevated through measuring sweat. Then we need to see how can we correct for the effect of confounding factors to build correlation? Because at the end of the day, sweat-based measurements is a proxy measurement. That means that we are not directly going to the source. We are trying to make an observation a few layers higher. Then we need to make sure, as an engineer, it's kind of like not that much of a complicated problem. It just means that there are no sources of noise and interference along this path. We just need to correct for that or accept them for what they are, and then shift the effort toward what's the most accurate measure that we can get out of this measurement. Maybe if we are getting away with 20% degree of correlation, maybe that's already good. It give us something useful that we can provide some useful information that the user can act upon and improve their performance or nutritional habit or happiness, whatever that may be.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think I don't want to take up too much more of your time.
No worries.
But yeah, no, that was great. This is it was kind of fun. We don't usually do, I would say, such an expanded Q&A, so this is kind of nice.
Okay, thank you.
But,
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, you know, for the MAMNA community out there, please feel free to join us not next week, but in 2 weeks for Dr. Xiao Wang from Bryn Mawr College. We'll be talking about magnetic skyrmions, which I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but we'll find out in 2 weeks. But in the meantime, there's still a few hours left in the day if you haven't voted yet. So
that's a nice plug-in. Very good.
Go do that if you haven't. But
I mean, we have to. We're in DC, the capital. We have to say it.
But hopefully, you know, in the meantime, this provided a welcome distraction, kind of a calm before the storm. I assume will be tonight, maybe the next couple of weeks. Who knows? But in the meantime, thank you so much, Sam, for coming and
thank you
for talking to us. And hopefully, when conferences resume, I'll get to see you soon. Maybe
yes,
MEMS is online this year, so maybe
yes, we'll connect there. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
But awesome. All right. Well, we'll see everyone soon. Stay safe. And thanks again.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. And we are